Right, welcome to another episode of the Old Paratrooper Podcast, and I am joined today by former Parachute Regiment officer, explorer, writer, photographer. List is endless, accolades there, but Mr. Levison Wood, how you doing, pal? All right?
Oh, I'm good, mate. Thanks for having me on. Yeah.
No dramas. We got there in the end. A few technical difficulties, the joys of technology. And what I've noticed as well, paratroopers of a certain age, because you're very similar age to me, struggle with technology. I don't know if that's the case with yourself, but it is with me anyway. Well. But no, thank you very much for taking the time to come on. I know you're busy gallivanting around the world, so I'm glad you can give me a bit of your time to chat about a few bits and bobs.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. Always good to chat to a fellow para.
No, nice one, pal. I always like getting someone from the Airborne Brotherhood on. It's right up my street. So what I like to do, pal, is with all the podcasts to kind of get a bit of a background about yourself, kind of where you grew up, a few bits and bobs, and basically kind of the path that you took in life and where you ended up and how you've done the things you have along the way. So yeah, over to you, pal.
Brilliant. Well, I mean, to be honest, I can put all and any of my sort of success down to the reg, to be honest, because I think it all started when I was about 10 years old. I went to I think it was the Staffordshire County Fair, and the paras were there with a big sort of scaffolding where you did the sort of rope jump and all that stuff, and I just remember being hooked from the age of 10 and wanting to join the army. I mean, I grew up on my dad's stories. He was in the TA, he was in the Staffords, and my granddad was in the Royal Welsh Fusiliers in the Second World War, fighting in Burma. So, there's a sort of long tradition of military stuff in my family. So I was kind of always destined to join the army, I think. And that's kind of that's where my interest began. I mean, both my parents were teachers, so they encouraged me to sort of read and do well at school, although they didn't have much money. So growing up in Stoke-on-Trent, I was kind of desperate to leave, to be honest, from quite a young age. And so I kind of set my sights on a career in the army. From that point on, I did one of those look at life things when I was like 16. Went to the careers office and basically signed up there and then. I wanted to join as an officer just because I thought, well, I'm going to go to university anyway. And applied for a bursary, didn't get it. and so I decided, actually, before I went to university, I'm going to go and travel and do a gap year. Now, in Stoke-on-Trent, I don't think anyone had done a gap year in those days, so I didn't really have much to go on in terms of having a mentor or anyone to sort of encourage me on that route. My parents were both very keen that I go to university because, I would be the first person in my family to attend university, but I really wanted to go and travel first. So at the age of 18, I just basically I'd spent the summer working at McDonald's and earning a bit of money, and off I went. I was sort of got a one-way flight to Cape Town in South Africa and spent 5 or 6 weeks hitchhiking around because I was on a pretty small budget. And that you grow up very quickly when you're hitchhiking around Zimbabwe and South Africa at the age of 18.
I can imagine.
And it was actually a pretty formative time. It was the first time I had a gun pulled on me was in Bulawayo in Zimbabwe. It was a really, but I really enjoyed that freedom, that independence, and the ability to just stand on your own 2 feet. And so I sort of took that with me, that sort of sense of finding the best in places and the best in people, because even though I'd had a few mishaps on my travels, generally speaking, 90% of the people you meet are lovely and kind and hospitable. And so that sort of started my love of travel. And then I went to university. I studied at the University of Nottingham, studied history, which I loved. I mean, my dad sort of brought me up on reading all about Greek mythology and military history, and I think he forced me to watch the film Zulu about 300 times in my youth. So I was sort of very, very interested in foreign cultures, in the sort of legacy of Britain's involvement around the world. And so that's what I studied at history. I sort of specialized in British imperial history, the great overland journeys throughout time, Marco Polo and all of that stuff. So actually, by the end of university, I was desperate to go and do something that would really challenge me. And so I'll never forget, it was the summer of 2004. I just graduated, and I postponed my Sandhurst entry by a year so I could take another year off traveling. And I decided I was going to hitchhike all the way from Nottingham to India. So off I went.
As you do. As you do.
Yeah. and doing it all with a budget of I think I had 750 quid. That was all I had from my student loan. And it was going to take me 5 months. So I did. I put my thumb up at Grantham Services, and off I went down to Calais and beyond. And it was amazing. You know, I went through Europe, into Russia, through places like Chechnya, the North Caucasus region. I was in Beslan in 2004 when they had that terrible massacre, and sort of managed to get myself arrested about 9 times in Russia, which was an experience. And then over the Caucasus into Georgia, Iran, hitchhiked across Iran, Afghanistan. So I was in Afghanistan in 2004, 2 years after the Taliban had fallen. And I was basically staying with Mujahideen in caves. It was quite an experience, and all of this before the army. So by the time I got to India, I felt like I'd sort of learned a bit about the region, and a lot about myself in doing so. And then I went to Sandhurst in 2005. So that was kind of where my military career began. I mean, I'd done some stuff with the Officer Training Corps at university, but which was fascinating, and you meet some very interesting people, you know, friends for life. But it all began for me in 2005 when I went to Sandhurst. Yeah,
no, fair play to you. I mean, I wanted to talk to you there about basically what you thought of Nottingham as a university town. Be careful what you say, because I'm from Nottingham.
You know what, I look back on Nottingham, some of the best times of my life. I absolutely loved it there. It was actually my first choice of university. I don't know why. I think I'd read somewhere about the ratio of there was lots more girls than boys, so I was sort of desperate.
That ratio. I got asked that ratio loads of times while I was in Denver.
Students for generations. I don't know if it's true or not, but
when everyone found out when I was in Depot that I was from Nottingham, they were like, right, we're going on the lash in Nottingham because it's like 8 women, and it got embellished every time. And it started off, it was like 3 to 1, and then before you know it, it's like it's 20 to 1 for women to men in Nottingham. It's crazy, and you're like, okay.
No, I love Nottingham. It was brilliant fun. I lived in Lenton with all the other students, and had a great time. You know, like I say, it was where I really got a taste for. Because I'd had this idea I wanted to join the army, and that was part of my plan. But actually going to the OTC down at Beeston and being a part of the reserves, or the TA as it was then, you go on exercise, you get to sort of play soldiers at the weekend, and I did some amazing stuff. Did my parachute, the basic free fall course down there as well. So it was a great introduction, and actually it really encouraged me to want to do it for real in the regular army afterwards. And actually, to this day, a lot of my good mates are the lads, girls and boys I met at university. So yeah, it was a brilliant introduction to that life.
Yeah, no, excellent. Well, you mentioned the Look at Life there as well. I mean, I did the Look at Life up in Proteus camp here in kind of Nottingham, and that is a good insight into joining. I think it gives you that kind of little bit of a taster, and if you're that way inclined, it's definitely a good thing for kind of younger people to go and have a bit of a taster to it, isn't it?
Totally. Yeah. No, it's good. And there was did a few of those insight days at various regiments. I went to go and see the Staffords, the Gurkhas, and all sorts. Really, it wasn't actually until I was at Sandhurst that I'd really thought about the Paras seriously since jumping off that tower when I was 10. Really, because to be honest, Paris has got such a reputation that I just never thought I'd be good enough or fit enough to get in. But actually, I put it down to boxing, actually, because I when I went to Sandhurst, you get 2 choices of regiment to join, and I thought, well, I'd already been invited and sponsored by the Staffords to join my local regiment, being from Stoke. And I thought, well, I'd get through my exams all right, so I might put the intelligence corps down as my other choice. So those are my 2 choices when I was at Sandhurst. And then I think it was my second term. You have to choose some sort of sport to do your Wednesday afternoons on, and I was sort of I'd done a bit of boxing at university, so I thought, well, give that a go. You know, it keeps you fit and gives you an excuse to sort of wake up early. Not that you need any excuse at Sandhurst, but you know, so I did that for a term, you know, whatever, however many weeks it was, 14 weeks of boxing, and it was pretty brutal regime. I mean, you know, you're up at sort of 5:30 every day at Sandhurst anyway. You have to wake up an hour earlier every day, so you're up at 4:30 boxing for an hour before your regular PT. So you know, it was the fittest I'd ever been. I turned up to every training session, and actually, out of the 50 or 70 people that were doing boxing, I think only 20 people got chosen for the fight night. And it's, you know, it's down to one, if you're obviously, you know, good enough, but two, if you're dedicated enough by turning up to each of the sessions, and three, you've got to find somebody in your right weight category. Anyway, I was chosen for fight night, which was amazing, because you know, you're up in the ring with 2,000 people watching. You know, they get the general there and all the local dignitaries and whatnot, and it was only then, you know, I did my fight, won, and you're then invited to the sergeant's mess, which up until then was this place that's sort of like, you know, it's very much off limits. You know, you don't get invited as a young officer cadet. You don't go to any of the sergeant's mess. But all the boxers taken to the sergeant's mess, you know, fed loads of beer. So I had like 2 or 3 pints at this stage. And then the para-reg rep came up to me and said, like, who are you joining? I said, well, I'm going to join the Staffords, I think, or maybe the Ink Corps. And he was like, no, you should be joining the paras. I said, well, I don't think I'm good enough or fit enough. He said, well, look, if you're happy to stand up in the ring in front of 2,000 people, at least give it a go. But they'd already done the shortlist at this point. I think there was like 100 applicants for 6 places, and they were down to the final 12. So he said, right, sit yourself down. I'm going to give you the interview right now. So there I was in the sergeant's mess with 2 pints in my hand, and he sat me down, and suddenly he was grilling me about current affairs and all that sort of stuff. And anyway, I got through, and yeah, ended up being, you know, getting through and being invited to go on to P Company. So that was a real turn up for the books there. I put it all down to the boxing really, and having the sort of yeah, I suppose the balls to get in the ring, and you know, credit to anyone that gets in a ring, because it's a pretty terrifying place to be.
Yeah, no, the boxing, you know, I'm massively into boxing. I did a bit in the reg, and then I fought at heavyweight quite a few times when I got out on the unlicensed scene. But I'm far too old for that malarkey now. I'm too much riddled with injuries. But you know, hats off. I always say the same to pluck up the courage and get in the ring. And it's kind of weird how that kind of pointed you in the direction of the reg then. And obviously the parachute regiment has got quite a history with its boxing, 3 para especially, being army champions for something like 13 years. But obviously to get selected, obviously the parachute regiment, we know the bar is set high for the parachute regiment for all soldiers, but for being a leader and being an officer in the parachute regiment, you're expected to be that next level again, aren't you? So I can understand the daunting part for it, and obviously that played a part on your mind, didn't it?
Well, it did. I mean, you know, I think at that point then, when I was sort of suggested to me that I should put myself forward, and I did, and actually, you know, I just found myself in my, you know, you find your tribe, don't you? You find the people that you get on with, and the other lads that were all going for it were all really nice guys. You know, I was obviously daunted by the prospect of P Company, but actually, as an officer, you know, when you finish Sandhurst, you then go and do the Platoon Commander's Battle Course in Brecon, and that gets you really fit anyway. You know, you're sort of, at this point, you're wearing the maroon beret, even though you haven't earned it, but you then have to go and do P Company. So you know, it's the other way around for soldiers, I know, but you kind of, we get given it, and then if you don't pass, that's it, it's taken away. So there's all the more incentive to get through, I think. Although not everyone did. You know, one of the guys on who'd you know got through it to that point failed P Company. So but I actually really enjoyed P Company when I was up there, because it was up until that point you're getting absolutely thrashed with you know, pretty much round the clock in Brecon, and then actually you're only sort of doing 2 events on P Company. So by the time you get there, you know, as long as you're well prepared and you don't get injured, then it wasn't actually as bad as I thought it was going to be. So yeah.
Yeah, it's the injury bit, isn't it? It's always the case with P Company. I mean,
Yeah,
don't get me wrong, it's you've got to have a level of fitness when you start it, and
totally.
you
Yeah,
get fit as you go. But it's also if you can get through it injury free, you stand a good chance of kind of
totally.
passing due. But obviously, I
Yeah.
remember sort of doing some and seeing some of the kind of all arms P Companies when the officers are in the white t-shirts and stuff, and they're expected. You can't be sitting in the middle of the pack there. You're
Oh, no,
expected to
you're
be
usually
up the
ordered.
front.
Get to the front and then get to the back, then get to the front again. I mean, we were having to do loops of all the blokes, which you know, in hindsight is quite funny, but at the time you're sort of like, yeah, it was hard.
Hanging out your arse, yeah, I bet.
I don't
So
think
yeah,
I'll be doing it now.
no, God, no. Gee, I couldn't think of anything worse. It'd kill me off. Now I can hardly run 100 meters down the road without pulling an hamstring. It's ridiculous. But yeah, so kind of you passed Peacock, you got through Sandhurst, and then you went to one of the parachute. Which battalion did you go to?
So I went to 3 para. So this was now the summer of 2006. So the battalion had just got back from Herrick. Was that Herrick 4, wasn't it? The big one. So that was the first sort of major conflict of the campaign, really, when it all kicked off. So I was suddenly thrown in as a junior platoon commander, age 23, in charge of an entire platoon of battle-hardened war veterans, which was terrifying. I mean, I'll never forget one of my full screws, Corporal Crabtree, Chris Crabtree. He's sort of the way he introduced himself. Sir, can I tell you a joke? He said, how many Sangin veterans does it take to change a light bulb? I said, I don't know, Corporal Crabtree. He's like, of course you don't fucking know, you weren't there. I mean, that was the kind of stuff I was, you sort of deal with. But ultimately, it was a huge honor to be put in that position, because you learn a lot as a platoon commander from your blokes, from your staff, that how to actually, what the realities of war are like, actually. And so I then had to wait 18 months before deploying. So the hardest part of my job was just keeping the blokes motivated in the period of their decompression, and suddenly they were back on some exercise in Wales or wherever, and they were like, oh well, what's the point in this? And so that was, I think, from a leadership perspective, one of the hardest bits was just was keeping people motivated. Then there was a big turnover of new recruits joining, and then them being in the same position. So actually, by the time we deployed again in 2008, there'd been such a turnaround. I think there was only 3 or 4 of the guys from the original platoon in there. So I was kind of seen as almost this slightly more senior person in the platoon, because I'd obviously been in there longer than everybody else, even though I hadn't deployed, which was probably a good thing by the time I got out to Afghan, because actually I felt confident that I knew what I was doing, and I was very familiar with all the soldiers by then, and ready to go and put myself in that position.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. It's a difficult one for anyone turning up at battalion, but obviously turning up as an officer, you're kind of on your own with a platoon of guys that have all done the same thing, and your training's been a little bit different, and you're trying to kind of infiltrate, not come across, because I mean, there's lots of officers that come in there. I've seen them that come in and try and start, but you have to kind of integrate, and that's one of the qualities of being a leader, isn't it? And I see that in day-to-day stuff now, and I have done throughout my careers. It takes a special kind of person to come in and sort of infiltrate without coming across as a bellend, for the want of the better word. You know what I mean? It's true, though, isn't it?
That's the right word. Yeah, no, it is, and we get hammered with this at Sandhurst, but nothing quite prepares you for that moment that you take over your platoon, and the blokes are just like looking at you completely nonplussed, and you then have to gain their respect, because it's certainly not something that just comes with the badge or the rank. It's something you've got to earn. And I think, honestly, being fit is a really good start, because if you can outrun most of your blokes, they'll sooner, you'll earn a bit of respect just by virtue of the fact that you're physically capable. And that's really important. If you're the fat knacker at the back, people are just not going to take you seriously at all. And then also it comes down to, also, like you say, not being a bellend, because if you start being really arrogant and say, I know this, I know that, at the age of 23, you don't know anything, frankly, and you can't pretend that you do. Doesn't matter whether you've been to Sandhurst or anything else. But for me, I think, it's just like, actually, I came from the same background as most of the blokes anyway, so it wasn't too much of a leap for me to relate to some of these guys. So, you know, and actually I think the fact that I'd been to Afghanistan, albeit backpacking around and sleeping in caves, was actually, I think a lot of the blokes were like, okay, who's this nutter, that we're not going to sort of you know, I'll sort of give them the benefit of the doubt here. So I think that helped, and also just like listening to the guys, you know, seeing, you know, understanding what mattered to them, and obviously, you know, when in peacetime in barracks, 90% of my job was G1, was just looking after the blokes' welfare and getting them out of trouble and literally bailing them out of jail. I mean, the amount of time I spent in magistrates' court or sort of getting people off minor infractions was kind of like, it was an absolute joke. But it was, you know, I look back and it was quite funny actually, because you sort of you learn the system, don't you? You learn what really matters. And actually, if you get a few blokes out of the nick, then they do start respecting you pretty quickly.
Exactly. I was going to say, you know, I've never really looked at it like that. I always kind of see it as like your leadership kind of is important in the field and obviously in Africa. But as we know, the blokes love being in them environments. That's what we train to do,
Yeah.
want to be in them sort of environments. So yeah, the bit is when they're bored and on the lash downtown and getting
that was being in the field's easy. I think leadership in the field is easy. Leadership in battle is actually, I think, that was the easiest part of the job, because that's literally what you're trained to do. But people don't necessarily train you how to keep blokes motivated when they are bored, and there's nothing more dangerous than a bored para.
It's very true. It's very true. I'm still like that now when I'm 44 years of age. I get bored, it's trouble, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, so fair play to you. So what you said 18 months before you then deployed on your first tour of Afghanistan.
That's right, yeah. So I got to battalion in the summer of 2006, and then we deployed in the spring of 2008. So it was towards the end of my time as a platoon commander. So, you know, I just did 4 months as a platoon commander, but it was honestly, it's brilliant. So I really enjoyed it. I really relished the opportunity to put into practice all of the stuff that I'd been training to do. And we'd got a very solid platoon at this point. We've been training a lot, loads of exercises. We'd spent 6 weeks, ironically, in the jungle, but our pre-deployment training for Afghanistan was in Belize. But to be honest, the principles are the same. And actually being in a you know, an unfamiliar environment that's challenging was actually great preparation. So I think we all felt ready, and it paid off. You know, it was a great tour. You know, we got on a few scraps, but it wasn't you know, we were on the Regional Command South rapid reaction job, so basically based out of Kandahar airfield, but doing sort of strike operations and some of the peace support stuff. Meant that we were bouncing around. We weren't stuck in one of the FOBs, so we were kind of in and out of helicopters, landing, spend a month here or a couple of weeks there, take over a FOB and then extract. So it was quite varied actually. We're doing all sorts of things, from helping the you know, AMP build a police station, through to strike ops, through to, you know, the sort of the more sort of humanitarian side of things. So it was, you know, it was really interesting. And very lucky. Didn't lose anyone, didn't have any dramas. I know 2 para had a really tragic time. They got smashed very hard, but 3 para were very, very lucky on that tour.
Yeah, I remember I was obviously out by then. I was working close protection in Iraq by then. So I went down to a bit of a reunion, and I will say I felt out of place because the lads had just come back from that 2008 tour, and I was there, and I couldn't really relate to kind of what they'd been through. I'd had my own incidents, obviously doing the close protection, but nothing like what they were doing in Afghanistan and stuff like that. So yeah, I felt a bit kind of out of place when I went back. I know they had a rough time. So was there any kinetic stuff on that tour that you?
Yeah, there was. Yeah, we had a few incidents. You know, every op we had something going on. I mean, there was a couple of moments we came a cropper. I mean, one incident was particularly sort of close shave. We'd been told to go after this Taliban bomb maker. So we'd gone in on what was billed as the biggest airborne operation since the Vietnam War. I'm not sure if it's true, but there was a lot of Chinooks. I mean, it was quite a sort of hair-raising sort of infiltration, because we're playing Ride of the Valkyries, blaring on the loudspeaker, going in the Chinooks. to this location near the village of Naugam down on the Arghandab River. We'd been told that there was this like high profile bomb maker in the village. You know, we were going in and it was a dawn raid, and landed in this empty river valley, ready for action. And then we got out. It's completely quiet, not a single human being in the whole village. We thought, okay, well, this is suspicious. So as we were sort of patrolling through, we came under fire, and then it basically ended up being a sort of 10-hour firefight all day. And we were basically just chasing the bad guys around. And I found myself in this sort of very narrow alleyway with high walls either side, and those irrigation ditches either side of the track. And I was just behind the first section, and just as we were patrolling, I saw this sort of head pop up from the wall, and it couldn't have been more than 10 meters away. And I thought, that's strange. I wonder who that is. And of course, next thing you see is an AK-47 just coming in straight over the top of the wall. This Taliban bloke unloaded an entire magazine straight at my platoon at point blank range, and God knows how, but absolute miracle, nobody got hit. We all dived straight into this irrigation ditch, as you do, you sort of SOPs, get into some cover. Turns out that was his well-laid plan, because I looked down right between my legs, there's a landmine between my feet. And the entire ditch was just filled with mines. So that was, that was his plan. And I don't know to this day, but nobody got injured. Everyone was just straddling these mines. Wow. There we go. It was a lucky escape, but that was just one of many incidents. My vehicle got on another one. We've been sent to go and rescue some blokes who'd been they were in a Wimmick, and they'd driven over an anti-tank mine, and sorry, I think no, it was an anti-personnel mine, because otherwise it would have been a lot worse. But they blown the wheel off this Wimmick, and so we'd been told to go and pick the guys up. So as we drove in, they were dusting themselves off. We got them in the back of one of our Vikings, and then we were sort of doing a 3-point turn at this point out of this sort of plateau. And what we kind of hadn't appreciated was we were clearly in some sort of land, some sort of minefield, or I don't know whether these are legacy mines from the Soviet era or what, but for whatever reason, the guys that had just been sort of involved in this this explosion were then in the lead vehicle. So we're pulling out again, and then guess what happened? Boom! Straight in front of me, their vehicle got hit again. Wow. So it's the same 3 blokes. They were all blown clear of the vehicle again. They were absolutely fine. So massive stroke of luck. And I thought this time around, we can't. I don't want to put anyone else at risk to get these guys. So I had to go out myself with a bayonet, stabbing the ground to sort of check for mines. Got them in the back, and off we went. And then my commanding officer said we need to go and deny the vehicles that we'd left behind, because they'd obviously got radio equipment in there and stuff. So but I was told to stay behind because we'd got an O group, and so my section commander went in my vehicle to go and blow up these 2 knackered vehicles, and then I saw in the distance, just as it was driving off, another explosion, and the commander's seat where I would have been sitting was completely vaporized. I mean, thankfully everyone was okay, but I just think, thank my lucky stars that if I'd have gone on that mission, I mean, the driver was fine, everyone else was all right, and like I say, the whole platoon was absolutely fine. But some very, very close escapes throughout that tour.
Yeah, it's a weird one, isn't it? And I kind of always see it as fate with stuff like that, like you not being there. And I've been on a few podcasts myself to chat about a few incidents that I've been involved in, and they all kind of are the same sort of thing, where I've kind of changed drivers with someone and drove a different vehicle, or I've kind of, on this particular day, this circumstances happens that doesn't usually happen, and it's resulted in me not being Indian. And you think, wow, that's just the way the stars align, isn't it?
There we go. Yeah, no, it is. I feel very lucky, because it could be a very different story. So yeah, here to tell the tale.
No, happy days. Well, I'm glad you came back unscathed, and I'm glad obviously you suffered no major casualties, or certainly no fatalities. As you said, not always the case, especially considering the 2006 tour that 3Para had. But yeah, so obviously you came back from that tour. Was you already considering so what was you considering leaving? Because excuse me if I'm wrong, for I don't think it's too unusual for. I did sort of 7 years. A lot of Toms do maybe 6 or 7 years of leave. And I think the same sort of pattern with officers. They tend to do 4, 5, 6 years, get to the rank of sort of captain, and then make that decision. And then you don't find very often that officers leave anywhere in between. They usually either choose the 6 years or roughly, and then do a full career, don't they?
Yeah, that's right. So you usually get to captain, and there's only so many jobs available for OCs and for majors and colonels, of course. So there's a pretty narrow bottleneck. But I'd sort of done that tour. I then spent 2 years up in Catterick as an instructor. So I ended up doing P company with the blokes about 5 or 6 times again. So that kept me fit. But then at that point, I was sort of considering my options. I mean, I kind of I thought about other, going on selection and stuff like that. And then there was going to be another tour to Afghan, which I'd sort of put my hand up for one para. But the army being the army, no disrespect to the people in Glasgow, but I don't think that much thought sadly goes into postings. And it was blokes with 2 kids who didn't want to get posted to one para for big tours that were getting sent there. And then there's people like me. I'd have gone to Afghan to 3 or 4 times if the opportunity had been there, but then I was sent to Catterick to go and stagger on with the Joes, which wasn't why I signed up at all. But so I kind of lost a bit of faith in the system there, because it felt like it was just a sort of surname bingo, really, which is where you get sent, and so that did sort of, I lost a little bit of faith in the system, sadly, as a result of that. And then so I thought, I'll just put my name down for selection. And then stupidly, I had a Mexican girlfriend at the time, so I went out to Mexico and ended up doing a rodeo on this ranch on a horse, and basically got thrown off a horse and broke my leg just before selection. So so I thought, well, that's no good. That's kind of my fate is sealed here. So I went back to, tail between my legs, back to Catterick, and said, what, I'm just going to sign off at this stage, because it's going to take me 6 months, 8 months to recover, and then I'll probably have to go and be, RSO or something like that, which I didn't fancy. But because of an admin balls up at Glasgow, they were like, well, you haven't renewed your contract anyway, so if you want to leave, you can be out in 3 months. So flash to bang. They put me on gardening leave straight away because I had a busted leg, and I was out literally like the day after. So I was suddenly left with this, on the one hand, okay, I'm out now, I'm completely free to do whatever I want to do, but without really much of a sort of clue as to what that was going to look like. So so I was faced with all this freedom. I still had this like long, this boyhood dream to like do something along the lines of exploration, and maybe I've been watching a bit too much Indiana Jones or whatever. But the idea occurred to me then to find a way to make travel my career. And me and another para, actually, a mate called Tom Bodkin, we ended up setting up a little company called Secret Compass, which basically was taking the concept of adventurous training and applying it to Civvy Street. The old adage of civvies will pay thousands for this. Well, turns out they will, and we were leading expeditions to quite random places. I mean, the niche was sort of conflict zones and post-conflict zones. So we took people horse riding in northern Afghanistan, skiing on the Iran-Iraq border, camel riding across the Sudan. So, quite punchy little trips, albeit 2 or 3 weeks long. So they were manageable for people who wanted to just have a bit of a strange holiday. And it did appeal to all sorts of, city boys who wanted to like brag to their mates that they'd been to Iraq, but equally people that were working for the UN and wanted to sort of actually do a proper recce of a place, but within the safety of a group. And the company did really well. And within 3 years, we'd sort of totally dominated the travel industry space in terms of the expedition world and got a really good reputation. And before we knew it, we'd been getting all these requests from production companies, the media, to get their journalists in and out of difficult to access places. So it was a bit like the security circuit, but specifically for media. So I was doing a lot of CP stuff for all sorts of random people I was looking after George Clooney in South Sudan. I was doing stuff for the Beckhams and all sorts. So it was kind of it was an entry into a very different world, but with that media sort of angle on it. So I learned the language of media. The hardest thing about going into any new industry is learning the vocabulary and the vernacular of what on earth does all this mean. A bit like in the army, there's so many acronyms that it's very easy as an outsider to just be completely flummoxed by it all. And so, yeah, that was my intro to media, very much behind the scenes as a producer, as doing the security, logistics, and all that stuff. And then by a twist of fate, back in 2030 or 2012, I've been working on this Nat Geo show again in South Sudan, which is quite a dangerous place, where I met this director, and he was like, why aren't you doing stuff in front of the screen? Get on camera and talk about some of the places that you have been to. I thought, well, it never really occurred to me to do that, but I thought, well, why not give it a go? So I thought I need to come up with something big, something that's never been done before, something that is so bold that will get the attention of TV people. So I had this idea of walking the length of the River Nile, which I sort of had a quick bit of research and realized nobody had actually walked the whole length of it before. So that's what I set out to do. And I think just by sheer virtue of the fact that it was so big and bold and daft, Channel 4 were like, okay, well, we'll give you some money, go and film it. And that was kind of the journey that changed my life forever, because suddenly I was getting paid to do something I really enjoyed. And it started, it opened up a whole new raft of possibilities.
No, I bet. I mean, that is, like I say, it's a bold statement, that, obviously, and I didn't quite realize how long the Nile was, a bit naively. And obviously some of the countries it passes through, and obviously you kind of not come unstuck, but you encountered some quite serious fighting in Sudan and had to kind of divert. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, there was all sorts. I mean, in South Sudan, this was 2013, so it was, that even though it had just broken away from the north, there was still now an internal civil war going on. We were passing through villages where the whole village has been burnt down, and there've been all sorts of terrible things happened. But that was part of the journey. It was documenting what was going on in Africa at that time, trying to bring a bit of a positive light onto places, because there's so much bad news going on in the world. Actually, I thought by showing some of the amazing human stories might show a bit of positivity, but inevitably you can't shy away from the bad stuff as well. But yeah, it was an amazing trip. It was 4,250 miles. It took me 9 months. Started in Rwanda, went through Tanzania, Uganda, South Sudan, and then finally Egypt. So yeah, it was a long walk.
Yeah, I quite believe. But what an experience! I mean, like you say, to do something like that and then almost have it paid for and documented by Channel 4 as well. I mean, that is, you kind of hit the jackpot there, really. And
totally.
interest, well, brilliant.
No, it was great, and I wasn't quite prepared for the success that came off the back of it, because I thought, well, it's great, but that's probably it. I'll make that, and then I'll go and find a job afterwards. That was kind of I thought I'm very lucky to get this far, but it ended up being like the most watched show on television in 2015. The book was a Sunday Times bestseller, and then suddenly everyone was asking me what I was doing next, so I had to think pretty quickly. I was like, okay, well, what's the next biggest thing in the world? The Himalayas. So I said I'm going to walk from Afghanistan, in the Pamir Mountains, the Hindu Kush, all the way through to the Tibetan Plateau. So that was another 6 month, 2,500 mile walk, which happened the following summer. So keeping the momentum going was really part of the process, really, because I knew that if I had this great opportunity, I can't let it pass me by. And so I started planning immediately for the next journey and set off the following summer.
Well, the Himalayas one, I mean, I watched it, a while back and read about it and stuff like that. And that's the one that fascinates me. I have an obsession with Everest and Himalaya. And I said I wanted to summit it by the time I was 40, but look, life gets in the way, money, it costs a fortune to do it. So I'm hoping I do get base camping at some stage, just do the trip to base camp. So I think that's fairly manageable and stuff like that. But yeah, to walk the length of the Himalayas from the Hindu Kush, I remember seeing the Hindu Kush mountain range when I was in Afghanistan myself, and it's such a beautiful mountain range. And kind of did you ever struggle with any of the altitude sickness or anything like that?
In part, yeah. I mean, actually, ironically, our sort of health and safety guy went down with altitude in the Wakhan corridor in the middle of Afghanistan. He had to be carried out on a yak. Wow. So it's something you got to really take seriously. And that was only at 4,500 meters. So, it's something you got to be really careful with. But, I was acclimatizing and, up and down. I wasn't summiting that many peaks. It was more sort of following the valleys. We had a couple of high passes, the Urshad Pass in Pakistan. And then we climbed, we did some unclimbed peaks in Bhutan, but it was an amazing journey. I mean, I had a mischief there. Ironically, the one time I got in a car in Nepal, I was about halfway through the journey. It was the rainy season in Nepal, so I was trying to stay at altitude. And we got to this one village called Musikot, where there was a communist Maoist insurrection going on at the time. So they're very polite people, the Nepalis, as you know, but they were like, look, you can't camp here because there's a bit of political strife going on. So if you wouldn't mind taking yourself off to the next town and you can come back in the morning to carry on walking. So we said, okay. So we got a taxi and off we went. And just as we're going over this mountain road, the brakes failed in the car. And basically the car went flying off the edge of this cliff with me, my brother, who'd come out on holiday to visit me, my guide, Binod. And, it was about 400-foot drop, something like that. So it's pretty massive, 150 meters, which is same size as like most of the big buildings in the city of London. And again, very lucky escape, rolled down this mountain about 10 times and, managed to broke my arm. I've got a pretty big scar, you can see there.
Yeah. Good war wound.
But very lucky to survive. And so I had to pause the journey for about a month. I think it was about 50 days to get surgery on that and let that heal, but then carried on from the same spot and kept on walking.
Yeah. But again, there's like a common thing. All these sort of expeditions that you've done, that they do, obviously, because of the nature of the terrain, the conditions, the environment, and obviously kind of the conflicts that are in a lot of these countries. There is obviously a massive amount of danger with all of them, isn't there? I suppose do you think that was what makes them appealing as well?
I think that's part of the appeal, isn't it? I mean, like if it wasn't challenging, then what's the point? But equally, I don't go looking for trouble. I try and avoid it where I can, but sometimes it's unavoidable. And certainly, I mentioned it's often less about the sort of the political. That's probably 1 in 1,000 where it's far more likely that you're going to fall off a cliff in a car, which is just a part of but that can happen anywhere. It doesn't have to be in a war zone. So I try and keep things in perspective, and just try and remind myself of actually being in a road traffic accident is probably far more likely than anything else. So keeping your wits about you, certainly, but just maintaining that perspective is really important. Yeah.
No, I totally agree, pal. Yeah, so fair play. And like I say, the two that you've discussed so far are absolutely epic. And then that leads me on to kind of the next one you did with the kind of Arabian Peninsula and stuff. And again, some of the countries that you passed through on this kind of mission, if you like, is again, it's kind of fraught with danger, isn't it? So yeah, what was that one about, and what was that like?
Well, so after the Himalayas, I then walked all of Central America from Mexico to Colombia. That was another 6 months. And then
apologies. That one before that one then?
That was after, yeah. So that was 2016. So that was through all the sort of ganglands of Honduras and Guatemala and all that. The year after that, I did Russia to Iran. So I went from the Black Sea to the Caspian Sea through, all the North Caucasus, Islamic states, Chechnya, Dagestan, and then to Iran. And then at that point, that's when I set up my own production company at that stage, because I think Channel 4 they'd been hugely supportive, but they really weren't supportive of me going to Arabia for lots of reasons, but I think one, they thought it was too dangerous, but two, I think it's just too politically charged. I mean, turn the news on any time and there's always something going on there, right? But I was determined to go because I've always had this fascination with the Middle East, ever since I was a kid, you know, watching Lawrence of Arabia and just being brought up, you know, in the 9/11 era, like yourself. You know, all of our lives have been defined by events unfolding out of the Middle East, and so I wanted to go and, you know, really get an understanding of some of the ground truth there. But it turns out people in media don't like that because all they want is bad news. So I said, right, you know what, I'm going to do it myself. So without any funding from television, me and my mate Dave, ex-airborne engineer, we set up this production company. We paid for it ourselves, and basically we went and did a 5-month journey around the Middle East. Started up in the Iraqi Syrian border in Rojava with the Kurds, and then through Iraq, through the Kurdish parts, then down through federal Iraq. I mean, this was in 2017 when Daesh were still in control of most of the country, and the only way to get from Mosul, which was completely leveled at this point, down to Baghdad was literally hitchhiking with the PMF, which is the Hashid al-Shabi, which is the Iranian-backed militias. So we found ourselves literally strapped to the back of a main battle tank going into battle against ISIS, which was just wild. You know, there's a column of 200 vehicles. Most of them were like Toyota Corollas and, you know, people's taxis just driving straight towards ISIS villages. I mean, it was weird because even though these are the Iranian Shiite militias, they were kind of on the good guys' side at this point, you know, fighting against ISIS. And they were remarkably welcoming to me as a Brit, given the fact that it wasn't so long ago these are the same militias that were fighting against British soldiers in Basra and in Fallujah against the Americans. And I met this one Iraqi sniper who, you know, he'd got 400 or so kills to his name, you know, and he's very, very honest about the fact he'd been, you know, fighting against the Brits but he saw me as a sort of, there was that weird soldiers' camaraderie that comes of it, and it was a very odd situation to be sitting down with somebody who, you know, obviously been involved in those sorts of things. But it just goes to show the grey areas in war, doesn't it? You know, it's hard to sometimes draw a line between the good guys and the bad guys. But anyway, yeah, that was quite a wild trip because we were, I was on the sort of part of that offensive that finally got rid of ISIS in Iraq. So it was kind of interesting to be witness to the downfall of ISIS there. Then through the Gulf into Oman, across the empty quarter desert, bought myself a few camels. Went into Yemen, which was fascinating. I got chucked out of Yemen shortly after because the Yemeni government were threatened to drone strike my hotel if we didn't leave. And then I tried to get into Saudi, but obviously because we've been chucked out of Yemen, ended up having to sort of get on a dhow from Salalah in Oman, one of these little fishing boats. And we'd been told that this dhow was going to Djibouti in the Horn of Africa, but we got on this boat and it was 5 days, you know, no phone signal around the Gulf of Aden, you know, the most heavily pirated seas in the world. And we started taking us off course. I was looking on the GPS and trying to ask the Indian boat crew where we were going, and they didn't speak any English. And I thought, hey, this could go south. Anyway, we found ourselves off the coast of Puntland in Somalia, with this skiff coming up to the boat and being ordered to get into the skiff. So we basically got taken off this boat and taken ashore to Somalia. Anyway, it turns out the boat was owned by one of the pirate captains, and he just wanted to sort of, meet. He was absolutely fine. So we basically we were looked after and sent on our merry way overland because the boat was taking this detour. So very, very odd. We weren't taken hostage or anything like that. But we then had to basically hitchhike from Puntland in a place called Basaso all the way up to Djibouti overland through all those very interesting areas. So yeah, that was that, and then from there into Saudi, crossed out. I got the first ever tourist visa into Saudi into 20. So this was 2018, or no, 20 back in 2017. Before it all opened up, managed to pull some strings and yeah, got witness to Saudi before it opened up without any guides or minders or anything like that. Jordan, made it to Bethlehem in time for Christmas, which was lovely. And you know, my parents came out to we went to, you know, Church of the Nativity for Christmas, and then made it up to Lebanon to finish up. So the idea was to finish at the oldest city in the world, Byblos, on the Mediterranean Sea. So for me, it was just the most remarkable journey through this, you know, very, very confusing and conflicting landscapes, but also, you know, witness to such incredible part of history.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, some of them, and I know some of them countries myself. I've been through a little bit of Saudi way back in 2030 when I had to get off a ship, only through the port and to the airport and stuff. But obviously Somalia and stuff, having worked around there, I know how daunting it is when skiffs approach as well. And to be ordered to get into a skiff, I think I'd have been flapping quite a lot, to be honest. And then to obviously go on land in Somalia. I mean, I don't think that all of Somalia is bad, and you've just kind of proved.
No, I mean, like Somaliland
is as bad as the media make out, you know. But no, absolutely fascinating, that one. I kind of, like I say, I have read about that one as well, and I was a bit like some of the countries you pass through there. It's just craziness, you know. So
well, no, it was great. So that ended up going on. We ended up, so that went on Discovery Channel, but yeah, it was kind of vindication that, you know, it ended up sort of the show and the book ended up winning loads of awards. But I was very proud of that because it was the one trip that everyone said, impossible, you'll never make it, it's too dangerous, or blah blah blah. But it, you know, actually I came away from that feeling, you know, I went to go and shine a spotlight on a region that is in the news for all these wrong reasons, really. But actually, regardless of all that, you know, generally speaking, I was looked after very well.
Yeah, no, fair play to you, fair play to you. Well, I missed out the one there, obviously, about the Mexico to Colombia, and I had Carl Bushby on the podcast quite.
Oh, he's amazing.
Recently.
Is he still going? Where is he?
He's still going. He's just crossed the Caspian Sea. Swam it. He had to swim the Caspian Sea. It's obviously stopping and staying on a ship at night, floating, and then getting off and swimming. But he's just landed in Azerbaijan. And now he's on almost, if you like, the final leg after 25 years of walking around the planet.
How did he get across Russia in the end? Because I know he was stuck.
Well, he had to bypass it. He went into Russia and then got kicked out. He got arrested. And then he kind of, because of where he was at on the Caspian Sea, he couldn't go into Iran. He couldn't go round to Russia. So he had to end up coming across, swimming the Caspian Sea, which is another one of his harebrained ideas. So I've been following his story as well for quite some time. And it's just, he's bonkers. Bonkers. The man's bonkers. But hopefully he's on his route back now. But I don't know what you do after that. 25 years.
Well, I've got no idea. Where do you go from there? No idea. You have to keep going.
Yeah, definitely. So before, I suppose, we move on to the series that I've just started watching, I watched the Walking with Orangutans one and the Walking with Lions one. I've not gone on to the polar bear one yet, but they're both fascinating. But have you ever considered, because I've looked at it, not that I'm in a position to be able to do it, but you know, the longest walk in the world from the tip of South America to the kind of, is it right up to the top end of Siberia? Have you not? No one's ever done that.
Well, to be honest, I feel like I've done. I think I'll leave that to somebody else. I've done my walking days are sort of I think slowly coming to an end, just because you know I've had a couple of accidents in the last few years where I managed to break 3 of my limbs. So I've, you know, obviously done my arm. I did one leg in a motorbike accident, the other one paramotoring. So I'm basically full of metal now. So I've probably got a couple more expeditions left, but the prospect of spending 2 years or 5 years walking around the world is probably a bit. Yeah, I'll leave that to somebody younger.
Fair play. Thought I'd put it out there.
I've still got a few big trips left in me, but not quite that big.
Awesome stuff. So yeah, I suppose that leads me on to the kind of Walking With series that's kind of recently been released. So how did that come about? And like I say, I watched the Walking with Orangutans one, and I thought that was absolutely fascinating, passing through the jungle and bits and bobs. So
Well, so back in 2020, obviously it was COVID times, and I think the thinking was, we can't go and wander around shaking hands with people anymore. So need to do something that's COVID compliant. So I did this trip in Botswana called Walking with Elephants, and I basically spent 5 or 6 weeks walking across Botswana, following a herd of elephants. Obviously limited human interaction, but it was all ended up becoming all about the wildlife and showing just how amazing elephants are. It was a great opportunity to sort of do something slightly different. Still an expedition, still on foot, but adding a bit of value into conservation and helping raise awareness about a really important topic, I think. And so the latest series is really an extension of that, walking with different species, all endangered species that are iconic. Lions in Namibia, orangutans in Borneo, and polar bears in the Arctic. Just showing what it's like for both the wildlife and also the people that work and live alongside them in the world of conservation. But also, I was sort of spending time with hunters and people whose villages have been trampled by elephants. So it's kind of showing a balanced view and showing what life is like for people that live in these sorts of countries. So and I've always been interested in nature, and I think I've got this platform, and I may as well do something useful with it, and actually doing stuff about the environment is really rewarding. So that was the plan with this latest sort of project, and the next one I'm doing after this is actually all about trees and forests and all about how they play such an important part they've played such an important part in human evolution. We come from the trees, don't we, ultimately, but how now we're at this time in human history where we're sort of at risk of having a disconnection from nature. And I think we should all spend a bit more time outside and playing in the woods. It doesn't matter how old you are. I think that you can never be too old to go and play in the woods, because it's just good for us. And so that's kind of what I'm on a bit of a mission now, just to help people reconnect with nature.
No, I agree totally, pal. That is kind of one of the bugbearers of mine, being obviously of similar sort of age. You kind of, you're out and about playing with kids in woods and climbing trees and that. And it seems to be like a thing that, I mean, there are still groups of kids, but majority are fascinated with the whole, said it a million times, fascinated with the social media and anything getting them off that and kind of advocating about the kind of outdoors is brilliant. Because I think if most kids or most young adults got out and started exploring, whether it be the Peak District, the latest, we have some beautiful places in this country that people don't utilize enough,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think, and it's kind of, there's a bit of a duty of responsibility. If you're in a position where you can inspire and encourage other people to do that, then probably should be, shouldn't we?
Yeah, no, 100%. 100%. I have to mention, because my fiance, she thought this would be brilliant. I'm not so keen. She says, "Well, you got to suggest this thing." She was obviously only joking. I want to point out, but she said you should run across Iran and call it Iran. Now that was her. That's what she said to me last night. She says, "You've got to mention it. You've got to mention it." So
right,
I said,
well, I'll give that some thought.
I'm sure you will.
Maybe when it opens up again. I think it's probably not the best time to be running across Iran.
No, definitely not, mate. Definitely not. No. So yeah, I've like I said, I've started the kind of series over the last few days, and I'm really enjoying it. And I like what you're doing, and kind of sort of like you say, giving both sort of aspects to kind of like, I see where they kind of struggle because the kind of nature is taking their livelihood and stuff like that. So it's good from both aspects, I think.
Yeah, no, it is. I think it's all about getting people interested in subjects in a way that perhaps they hadn't thought about before, and that's what I love about this. My job, I think, is just telling stories in a way that maybe accesses an audience that wouldn't necessarily be interested in that kind of thing. Something I'm doing at the minute, and I know we were sort of introed, through Danny Rampling, our mutual mate. The film that we're working on together actually it's about veterans' mental health, but I thought there's a lot of films out there that are purely for a veteran audience, which is great, and they serve a purpose, but the only people who are going to watch them are people in the army or military, and I thought, well, I'm going to do something that's actually it gets people interested from the wider the wider public. So yeah, we're sort of currently in the process of making a short film about a veteran's mental health journey, but the plot is basically through at a music festival, so that's why Danny came on board with his music, and that's been a really interesting process as well. Is like sort of accessing, taking, a subject matter that's quite, it's serious and it's important, but contrasting that with the sort of the frivolity of a festival, and trying to tell a story in that quite new way. So yeah, that's what I'm working on at the moment.
Yeah, that was on my list to chat about, because obviously I had Danny Rampling on the podcast a few months back, and he mentioned this topic, and I was like, oh right, okay, sounds really, really good. And yeah, like I say, he's who kind of put us into it. I think I did message you back. I'm not going to defend you here, but I did message you before that, and you totally blanked me.
Did I?
And
Sorry about that.
It took Danny Rampling. No, it's absolutely fine. I know people are busy. It's absolutely fine. I'm only joking. But yeah, I suppose, obviously, hopefully, that kind of one of the goals with the podcast, why I started it, was to kind of, obviously, I get to talk to interesting people to share their stories and stuff that I'm really passionate about as well. But also was the goal of raising awareness for mental health issues within, not only within the military, but also within the emergency services, police force, fire service, and obviously they kind of have a lot of issues with stuff as well, but just across the whole board, if I could kind of do a bit of raising awareness. So I know you kind of do a lot for various kind of organizations and charities, so if you want to cover which ones do you kind of work with?
Well, on the veterans front, I've done a lot with obviously the Para-Reg charities, but I'm an ambassador for the Gurkha Welfare Trust. I've done bits with Help for Heroes and Walking with the Wounded. So I'm involved in quite a few different veterans organisations. I'm particularly interested in the veterans' mental health side of things, and that's where this film came in, was to try and raise funds and awareness from people outside of that spectrum. I'm an ambassador for UNICEF as well, and quite a few conservation charities. So I mean, my key things are veterans issues, education, and conservation. Those are the sort of three subjects that are really important to me. I do get asked to be sort of ambassador for all sorts of charities, but I think it's important to not spread yourself too thinly and just focus on the ones that you can actually make a real impact on. And for me, it's all about leveraging. I've got quite a diverse following of all sorts of people that are interested in travel, of course, and wildlife. But if I can sort of steer them onto some of these other causes in a subtle way, then I think it's great.
No, absolutely, pal. No, absolutely. And I have a lot of respect for what you're doing across the board. And like I say, I genuinely find everything you're doing so far like absolutely brilliant. Like really, really interesting. And like I'd have loved to have done stuff like that, but like I say, life. I've done a bit of travel myself, not near 100 crunches. I think I'm about 50, so I've got a bit of catching up to do yet.
You're still
but
young,
I will
mate.
get there. I'm still young, Plenty of time. But I suppose that lastly moves me on to kind of, you've touched on briefly about up and coming things, but is there anything that you've not mentioned that you've got up and coming that you'd like to kind of talk about quickly?
Well, I mean, all sorts. I mean, this was my directorial debut, filming this short film. But I think that a bit more where that came from. I've been working on a script which is all about Operation Pitting, so a movie all about the evacuation of Kabul. So that hopefully, touch wood, is going to be coming, starting going to production in 2025. And that's going to be really exciting to really pay tribute to the Paras who did such an amazing job in Kabul, back in 2021. So that's a big one. And then my tree book comes out in April next year. So that's called The Great Tree Story. And that is, like I say, it's all about the human connection with nature and forests and indigenous communities and how we can all get more involved in helping to protect nature. So that's something I've been working on for the last couple of years. Try and turn that into a film as well. Got a couple of big names on board in Hollywood as well for that. As long as they don't get cancelled first, you never know over there, do you? So, but it's I'm really excited to sort of bring some of these causes to the fore. I mean, I've always got there's always trips planned, but the world of television is quite it's a fickle industry to be in, so you can't bank on anything. So you have to sort of you know, just wait it out. That's the hardest part of this job, is just wait and see what happens next, and not be too fixed to one idea.
No, fair play, pal. And like I say, a lot of respect for what you're doing, and I love the stuff that you're putting out there. And again, I think my viewers and followers will be fascinated with your story and kind of certainly what you've got up and coming. So, no, thank you very much, pal, for taking the time to come on. I really, really appreciate it. Hopefully, we might get a chance in a year or two to do another one if the podcast is still running, and bits and bobs, and talk about what you're kind of up to then. But no, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure, pal.
Awesome. Thank you so much, mate. Cheers.
Cheers, pal. You take care.
Nice one, buddy. All right. Thanks for having me on.